Funding for the Think podcast comes from Wise, an app for people using money around the globe. With the Wise account, you can send, spend, and receive in up to 40 currencies. You can download the Wise app or learn more at wise.com. Terms and conditions apply.
Best-selling author Jesmyn Ward says she is terrible with directions. She finds it hard to orient herself in a place using the standard north, south, east, west compass points. She needs giant oak trees, country roads lined with flowers, and places she knew as a child. That speaks directly to her writing, where she takes that disorientation and pain and difficulty of contemporary life and turns them into portraits of home. From KERA in Dallas, this is Think. I'm Chris Boyd. In her new book, she tells painful stories to get to the solace on the other side. She feels living a carefree life isn't part of what defines her as a Black woman, nor does it define anyone living in contemporary America. That's her truth, and she finds comfort in it. She hopes you do too. Her collection of essays is called On Witness and Despair, and she spoke with me about it at a live event at Interrobang Books in Dallas recently. Let's listen to that conversation. Jesmyn, welcome.
Good to be here.
One of the things that you write that you wished for as a child that you didn't get a lot of was solitude. Talk about why that was hard to come by.
That was that was hard to come by because for many years when I was younger, my family, my nuclear family, actually lived with my maternal grandmother. She had a 4-bedroom house, and then she converted the dining room in that house into like a bedroom, and that is where my parents, that's where they lived. And then, but all of my aunts and uncles, all of her children, were still living in the house or in and out of the house. They would leave and then come back as necessary. So there was my grandmother, and then her 7 children, and then their grandchildren. So there were usually around like 14 of us living in the house, sometimes more than that. So yeah, not a lot of, there wasn't a lot of solitude.
What would you have done with that solitude if you'd had it?
Probably read more. Reading, I didn't come to reading early. You know, even it's so sad. Even as an adult now, I sort of envy children who are precocious readers and who just out of nowhere, just their brains are wired to know how to read at 4 years old, 3 years old, 4 years old. Like, that's amazing to me. But I learned how to read in school and learned how to read in 1st grade because I didn't know this until I was an adult either. But back in the 80s, in Mississippi, there was no kindergarten, which at the time...
So you just went straight into 1st grade?
I went straight into 1st grade. So I learned how to read in 1st grade, when I started, primary school. But I remember wanting to read so badly. And so once I learned, I immediately loved it. I immediately enjoyed it. And it was something that I spent a lot of time doing. Even when I was sort of surrounded, I would just seek out these corners, or I would read in my bunk bed a lot, just because I love stories so much.
It's so interesting that even as a kid, you were thinking about who was writing these books, and you thought about writers as being really magical. And I'm curious now, as a writer, what you've learned about the balance between the magic and the effort required.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think when I was younger, I just, I just assumed so many things about the creative process. I assumed that it happened whenever you were inspired, and I don't know, and that it was a type of sort of magic making, and unfortunately, I carried those ideas all the way into basically through my college career, and didn't really learn that writing is, it is a creative practice, right? that you have to, at least for me, that, I had to develop a sense of discipline, right? And commit, right, to writing a certain amount of time, 5 days a week, right? When I went to Michigan and studied for my MFA. And so since then, I mean, unless I'm going through a bad spot, which there have been a couple of difficult, moments in my career, but I sustained that, that schedule sort of, throughout. So yeah, I had to learn that it's something that you practice and that you exercise and that you do. And if you do it consistently, you can actually write a book. Yeah, because I think when I was younger, I just thought, oh, these things just happen when you're, I don't know, when you're inspired. But no, it's an accumulation of time and devotion.
You write that your grandmother, Dorothy, the grandmother that you lived with for much of your childhood, was like the first storyteller in your life. Did she tell her stories like, sit down, Jesmyn, I want to tell you this? Or was it like she's doing 9 things and she's talking about what her life was made up of?
Yeah, definitely doing 9 things. And then, telling stories, right? I mean, it was part of, she did it when we were shelling pecans on the porch. She did it when we were snapping beans on the porch. She did it, when she was, cleaning greens and cooking, or when she was cooking red beans. She did it when so I have a huge extended family. Just when I count my maternal grandmother's side of the family, there are over 200 of us. My family is humongous, right? And especially when my grandmother was here, and especially when she was younger, right? We would meet, all the time. We would just gather, and we didn't necessarily have to have a reason. And whenever we got together, right, there was always food, there was always music, there was always dancing, but there was always storytelling too. I remember my grandmother sort of holding court, whenever we would, meet as a family. And she would just tell stories, and she was so good at like imitating people's voices. She was like very funny, and so she was good at like hitting a punchline at the end of a story. And one of the, I don't know, something that I've been thinking about a lot lately about her storytelling is I've been thinking about the stories that she told me over and over again, right? And I've been trying to figure out why she would have told me those stories over and over again. I haven't found an answer yet. And I've also been thinking about like the earliest stories that she told me. I'm talking about when I was like, 6 years old, right? And one of the earliest stories she told me was the story about her birth that I, write about in the essay collection, right? And about her sister, her twin, right? And her twin being stillborn, and that's a pretty serious story to tell a 6-year-old. But I don't know. I think, maybe one of the reasons that was the earliest story that she told me, I don't know, is because she wanted me to remember it. She trusted that I could, I don't know, that I could carry it, like there's a certain amount of trust in that, and a certain amount of regard, I think.
She gave you the story. She didn't just tell you the story.
Right.
It seems like the twin thing is a theme that comes up throughout the book, right? Mm-hmm. There is, one baby who lives and one who dies, the Mississippi of misery and poverty, and the one of joy and extended family and cookouts. your own sense of self in one of the essays as a Black woman in America, compared with the way a lot of America sees your worth. Did the thinking of a lot of things in that twin sense start with your grandmother?
No one's ever asked me that, but I think that, I don't know, I think that might be the case. I mean, if that's one of the earliest stories that I heard and that I learned and that I was given as a child, then it would probably shape my worldview and my understanding of you know, how the world works. You know, and I think also probably sort of reinforce this idea, you know, that my grandmother, that was the subtext in a lot of my grandmother's stories, which I also write about, right? Like this idea that you tell the whole story, right? You tell the good and you tell the bad, right? You know, you write about it all the complication, all the contradictions. So yeah, I think that, you know, maybe that first story, you know, maybe that taught me that. And maybe I didn't understand it at the time. But yeah, I think so.
You write about the summer of 2000. You had just finished up your master's degree work at Stanford. You went home to Mississippi. You were hoping to live there. And you were spending more time, again, with your brother, who was 19 at the time, but it occurred to you that he seemed older than you. What was that about?
It was because he knew more about the way the world works than I did at that time. You know, I think if you had told me that I was naive, I would have resisted that idea and probably would have taken offense. But I was, you know, and he, you know, at that point, you know, my brother was, I think, dealing with a very different reality than I was. You know, I had, through hard work and, you know, through my mother's hard work, and also a lot of luck, you know, the route that I was going at that time was very traditional, right, route. Like I graduated from high school, I went to college, you know, I was just on a very different path, whereas my brother probably had an undiagnosed learning disability, had always struggled in school, dropped out in the 9th grade, then attempted to go to do a Job Corps program, was not able to complete that, then was attempting to sort of study for his GED and pass his GED exam, which he was still doing, you know, sort of at the time of his death. And at that point, I mean, he had been working in one form or another, right? Like whether or not, you know, he had been doing, I guess, respectable, legitimate, you know, manual labor at the same time that he had been sort of dabbling in illegal employment, you know, for probably 4 years at the time of his death. So his lived experience, he was much more familiar, I think, with how limiting and oppressive the world could be to somebody like him and to someone like us. And I was definitely naive to that at the time.
Well, to go back to that twin perspective, for you, I mean, you're spending time in these fancy schools with like the cream of the crop students, of which you were one. So you're in that world and you're fitting into that world, and then you go home and you fit into that world too. It must have been strange to reconcile these things, to reconcile, like, you know, your brother is smart and hardworking, and he's had he had the time, he would have figured things out.
Right.
But he wasn't there yet.
Right.
And I would imagine some of the people you knew at college would not have understood.
Right. Right. Not at all. And you know, and it was difficult because some of them, people who I was like very close to, right, had little understanding for my brother, for my sister, right, for, you know, I don't know, many of the people who I love, you know, from Mississippi. They just couldn't understand, I don't know, why they didn't, I don't know, they didn't make different choices. I don't know, and I think in the same way that I was sort of naive and blind to the way that, you know, being Black and poor in Mississippi narrows your choices and narrows what is possible for you. I think that they also suffered from that same naivete. It's a word that I'm going to mispronounce because I've only ever read it.
We don't go around saying that word, right?
Right.
You know, you talk about like choices and whether they actually exist for people in the moment. And I thought it was interesting when you wrote about, in the essay about Hurricane Katrina, you explain something that maybe people, rich or poor, who don't live in hurricane zones are unaware of. Your family didn't evacuate because it's very expensive to evacuate.
Right, right. Yeah, it's you know, I just said that that just on my mother's side of the family that there are over 200 of us, right? How do you evacuate 200 people? You know, how do you evacuate, you know, even if my nuclear family was going to evacuate, right? My mom, my dad, and then, you know, me and my 3 siblings, right? How do you evacuate 6 people, right? It's difficult, it's complicated. You know, I mean, I don't even think that we had a car that would fit all 6 of us at one time. So, you know, and that's not even like addressing the fact of like, how far do you try, like where do you go? How far do you drive? What do you do for lodging once you get there? How long, depending on the size and the power of the hurricane, right? How long might you have to stay in this place if it's sort of devastated, you know, your home? I mean, if we had left, if we had evacuated for Katrina, which we didn't, but if we had evacuated for Katrina, I had friends, I had friends who evacuated, and like the power didn't come back. We were out of power for at least a week. You know, no electricity. And where I'm at, that also, because we live out in the county, right? And so that means if you don't have power, you don't have water, right? So we were without power and water for an entire week, right? And so it's yeah, people don't evacuate because they're, you know, where I'm from, hurricane season is every year, right? And has been since people settled that region, right? And so we had worked out, you know, we had worked out these, I guess, these like protocols to survive, right? There are things that you do. You know, stock up on sort of canned goods and you board up the windows and you fill the bathtubs with water.
You did learn that the police in the area were dispatched to like guard the strip malls and things, not people.
Right, right, yeah. Which was, I mean, it shouldn't have been shocking to me, but it was shocking. Yeah, it was shocking. Like I remember, you know, it was weird. That was so we were able to drive into Pass Christian, but at the point where we sort of got into like, we got to like the sort of edge of the town, and at that point you couldn't drive any further, right, because of the devastation. The roads were blocked by houses, right, which had been sort of picked up off their foundations and deposited in the middle of the street or deposited on top of each other. I mean, it's hard to imagine that kind of devastation.
You read about how quiet it was in past Christianity.
It was very quiet, and there are all these people who we are seeing, like once we park the car, and then now we're just sort of walking. So all these people that we're seeing, like there was an entire trailer park where the trailers had been bulldozed by the storm surge, picked up, deposited other places, and where the people who lived in them, were basically unhoused now. They were homeless. And so that, I was like surrounded by people who needed help, right? Everywhere you looked, everyone needed help. And the police were, guarding the Dollar General and guarding the Walmart. And even though all these people need help, they need shelter, they need water, they need food. So it was surreal. Yes, but it was also very, very, very quiet.
I was really struck by, you write that one of the things that you learned losing your brother was that the love you feel for a person goes nowhere when that person is gone. Mm-hmm. And you discovered that's true of places that disappear. And people might say, well, your hometown is still there, but it's not, is it?
It's not. And I began to think about the idea of home and wrestle with the idea of home and what home is and whether or not you can ever return to your home. When I was 23, which is when I went to Michigan to work on my master's in fine arts. And in part because I had a friend he was a poet, Raymond, and he was from the Florida Panhandle, a little town on the Florida Panhandle. And he, like many of us, had just fled when he graduated from high school. But the Florida Panhandle is very close to where I'm from, and so we would have these like conversations about home all the time. And I remember in one of the conversations he said, you can never go back, right? Because the home that you knew, that place doesn't exist anymore. And this is before Katrina, right? But he was right? Like the Dalil of my childhood, I don't know, probably disappeared while I was in college, because it just, became more developed. It changed so much. And then you have something like Hurricane Katrina happen, which totally changes the natural landscape and the sort of man-made, I guess, landscape. And so it's disorienting because sometimes when I go home, I realize that part of how I'm terrible with directions. I am, I'm terrible with directions. It is hard for me to sort of, navigate, right? And I realize that I would use a combination of structures, but then also, this big oak tree here, right? Or this stand of, pine trees here, or there are sort of, I would use like the natural landscape also, right, to orient myself badly. But I can't do that anymore because it's so different, right? And even the home that I know now, that I've become accustomed to navigating, that with the next big hurricane, right? Whenever that is, I'm hoping that it is not anytime soon. Then that will change. That home will no longer exist either, and then I'll have to, relearn it, remake it.
There are people, including some of your friends, who are like, Jasmine, you could live anywhere at this point. Why Mississippi? And I'm curious as to whether in that question is contained either maybe too much criticism for what Mississippi is, or not enough criticism for what the rest of the United States is?
Both, I think. Yeah, definitely both. And also too, like there's this narrative that we told ourselves when we were younger that I think that some of my, family and friends like still have this attitude. And I think it exists, in the outside world as well, right? Like, but when I was growing up, like we always thought to succeed was to leave Mississippi and to never live in Mississippi. I mean, maybe retire there, right? When you're in your 60s or something, but to leave was to succeed in life, right? It doesn't matter what you do once you are outside of Mississippi, but just just leaving was a sign of success and of progress. So I think that the events of the, last, decade have definitely shown me that, Mississippi is not an anomaly, right? And that, just leaving Mississippi does not mean that you will live this, carefree life, where you are not, struggling with the same sort of repressive institutions and systems that we live with in Mississippi. So,
more than once in the book, you talk about writing as if it's a kind of motion. You talk about writing toward something. You write toward pain, you write toward struggle, you write toward understanding. Explain that phrase.
But I've been writing towards pain, I think, and writing towards difficulty since I started writing about home, right? And didn't really understand that was what I was doing until I returned to Stanford as a Stegner Fellow. And that's just one conversation that we would have in the classroom often, right? Where we were sort of advised to write towards difficulty instead of away from it. And where we were told that writing towards difficulty will often produce more powerful work. So really, I guess those conversations gave me a way to understand what I was attempting to do in my work. And I think that that advice is still valuable to me, because I think that writing towards pain and writing towards difficulty keeps me honest in my work because of who I choose to write about. Because I think if I wrote away from pain and away from difficulty, then I wouldn't be writing truthfully about the people who inspire me and the people who I love and about the place that I love.
Yeah, you say that sometimes you wish that you could write things that were easier, more relaxed. Does that just not feel true to your experience?
Okay, so so here's maybe something funny, so over the past 2 years, I have been working on a YA/middle grade book. So I'm trying to like straddle that line between YA and middle grade. Right now I'm not doing it successfully. And so that story, right, you think would be lighter. You think I'd be able to write to avoid more difficult material, right? But then I think about the children's books like that I grew up reading and that I love. Everybody's an orphan, right? Everyone's abandoned, right? I used to love this book called Dicey's Song, right? She's like homeless and traveling like the United States with her siblings, trying to find a home. That's dark. And so as I'm working on this YA middle grade book, like I find myself like, the father has this incurable illness, you know what I'm saying? Like,
I would have been there for that,
right.
by the way.
Children are being, kidnapped. And I mean, I find myself, again, like writing towards difficulty. But, part of the worth in doing that is that I know even for younger readers that they are living through some of this, right? Like they're experiencing this in their lives, right? So hopefully my writing about it will help them to live through it, right? Which is the same way that I think that I feel about my literary fiction, the same way I feel about my creative nonfiction, right? Like part of the reason that I write towards difficulty, I not only want to write well and want my work to resonate with people, but I want to help people who are living through grief, living through loss, right? Living through hardship. I want to better help them. I want them to feel less alone, right? And I want to help them to sort of better weather whatever they are struggling with.
You list As I Lay Dying as a foundational book in your life as a writer. And yet, you have a lot of problems with the story and with William Faulkner in general. So will you talk about the complicated relationship that you understand yourself to have with him as a writer?
Yeah, so it took me a long time to appreciate his work. When I was in high school, and I think I write about that in the essay. So when I was in high school, one of my peers, or one of my classmates, told me that William Faulkner was his favorite writer, which I still don't believe that. I think he was just, I don't know.
He was trying to impress you?
Yes, he was trying to, but not me, but he was trying to, I don't know, sound sharp and super smart. But so he said that Faulkner was his favorite writer, and so I was like, well, I should try to read him, right? And at that time, I was a library kid, so I'm like combing through all the, the bookshelves in my high school library and reading Margaret Atwood and Gabriel Garcia Marquez and, Toni Morrison. And, so I'm attempting to, challenge myself by reading difficult work. And so I tried to read Faulkner then and I read some of it and it was not resonating with me. And it seemed difficult for the sake of being difficult. And so I don't even think that I finished the book. I think that I picked up The Sound and the Fury, and I read some of it, and I was just like, okay, this is not for me. And then when I was in college, I was an English major, had to read his short stories, Faulkner's short stories. Specifically, I remember reading The Bear, and I had, developed to a point to where I could see that it was genius and not difficult just for the sake of being difficult, right? I could recognize how intricate it was and feel the weight of it, but did not love it, right? And then when I was in my early 20s and I was in New York City, and again, at that point I was trying to learn how to read as a writer, right? Sort of be more sort of thoughtful in my reading and, pick up on things that I admire and ask myself why I admire them, and perhaps, I would try to sort of imitate them and work them into my work. And then I finally fully read The Sound and the Fury, and it was, it was good, right? And I could see that it was genius, but I didn't feel it, like there was I didn't love it. And then I went to Michigan and had to read As I Lay Dying for an imitations course, where we read, these sort of legendary writers, and then we were tasked with imitating their writing style, their prose style.
Sounding like them in an original story.
Yes. And of course we failed every week, or at least I know I did, right? But we had to read As I Lay Dying, and there's a part in the first few pages where Faulkner is describing the sky, and I had to put the book down for a second because it was so lyrical and so beautiful, and so I just felt I was like immersed in the experience, and it felt so present, and it was again resonating with me in a way that his work had never resonated with me, and then I loved it, right? And I I devoured it, right? But of course, there's a part sort of later in the book as they're sort of wandering the county when the family encounters Black people, right? And the way that they are perceived and that they're written about was off-putting to me, right? Because they were flat. They had no humanity, they had no complication. And Faulkner is the kind of writer who, in a phrase, can give you, complication and humanity, right? As far as a character is concerned. And so that was problematic for me.
Do you think he was aware of his inability to do that well?
I don't know. I don't know. I would hope so. But as I read more of older Southern writers who were writing around that time and after, so I'm talking about like Eudora Welty, Carson McCullers, Flannery O'Connor, and I'm encountering that again and again. I don't know. I wonder if they were blind to it, right? This sense of white supremacy that they have, that they have, been imbibing their entire lives. So I don't know. Part of me thinks that maybe they did not, that maybe he thought that he was, doing those characters justice and developing them and giving them rich interior lives, and maybe he thought that, maybe they all thought that. But as a sort of Black woman, reader, right? They're not.
You have an essay in the book that is so poignant to me when you discovered that your very much wanted second child was going to be a boy. Mm-hmm. You had this panic about, I'm bringing a Black boy into the world who will be a Black man. And at the time, you thought to yourself, okay, by the time this child is 9 or 10, I'm going to start telling him the stories he needs to move through this world safely. Mm-hmm. And he's 9 now,
He's
right?
9.
What stories are you telling him?
So I haven't had the talk with him yet. I can't remember the author, but I was just in New Orleans yesterday and the day before, and I was doing a couple of different events with Baldwin and Company, that bookstore, and one of the books that I saw on the shelf that I took a picture of, so I could buy it later, because it was on display, but I don't think it was for sale. It was called The Talk. And so I'm like, I need that. So I haven't had the talk with him yet, but he has questions. It's not as if he doesn't perceive, even if it is a childlike perception. It's not as if he doesn't, perceive racism, right? And most of his experiences with it are personal, right? But some of the things that he has observed, you know, a lot of it has to do with politics, right? And so we will have discussions about it. And I don't know how well I am. I don't know. I am attempting every day, day in, day out, to be the best parent that I can, right? And so I try to give him some context. I try to give him some history, right? And I am also frank about the fact that it's unfair. But yeah, I mean, I don't know, man. I mean, maybe the talk isn't one talk. Maybe it's an accumulation of conversations. I don't know. But we're talking about it. And I'm not only talking about it with him, right? But I'm also talking about it with my daughter, right? Who's 13 now. But, you know, I don't know. But then our conversations, I don't know, you know, are there's that extra layer of concern, because then we also need to talk about gender, right? And we also need to talk about consent, and we also need to talk about, you know, how the world will perceive her. I don't know, and then I'm trying to give her the tools to protect herself, right? Because the world is what it is. So, yeah, I mean, parenting is difficult, but I'm doing my best.
We're speaking this hour with Jesmyn Ward, winner of 2 National Book Awards for fiction and a MacArthur Genius Grant. She's author of a new book of essays called On Witness and Respair. We spoke recently in front of a live audience in Dallas. You're listening to Think. I'm Chris Boyd.
The last thing I want to ask you is this. I mean, sometimes the ways that stories can sustain us or save us is counterintuitive. To go back to the story that you gave about Hurricane Camille, which happened years before you were born. Mm-hmm. Your family has told stories about that forever. There are photographs of the devastation. You've seen some of those in your family's collections, and there's something about them that gives you hope. Help me understand that.
Okay, so part of the reason that, so the particular picture that I'm thinking of is of one of my cousins on my mom's side, and she is outside, right? So it's just just a random photograph that she took, or that someone took of her, but where you can see, so the landscape behind her, you know, because one of the things that a hurricane does is it flattens the landscape, right? Because it breaks the trees in half, and it, you know, rips them out of the ground. And so around her, it's just shrubbery, right? Because basically the forests have been sort of mowed down, right, by the storm. And but I look at that picture, and then I compared the landscape in that picture to the landscape that I knew when I was growing up in the 80s, in the 90s, in the early 2000s, right before Katrina. And it was lush, and it was beautiful, and you know, and it was full of forests, right? And so that gives me hope, because I know that it will come back, right? It will bloom again. Now another, you know, terrible storm might come and take everything away again, but hopefully it will come back. But, you know, I have new anxiety now, right? You know, given that report that was like big in the news, at least where I'm from, a couple of weeks ago, right, with a scientist from Tulane saying it's time to give up on New Orleans now and evacuate, right, because it's going to be completely underwater. You know, and I live on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, right, and my hometown is on the back of the Bay of St. Louis, right, and so I'm asking the same questions, right, about my hometown, right? I mean, that would be so hard to live through, right? If the water advanced so much that then my hometown would be gone for good, like completely underwater. And that, I don't know, that specter, it scares me. Yeah, it scares me. And I don't know. I'm still figuring out how to sit with that possibility, and how to think about that possibility. I don't know. I haven't figured it out yet.
Thank you so much for this conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, Jasmine Ward.
My guest was Jasmine Ward, winner of 2 National Book Awards, a MacArthur Genius Grant, and the author of a new book of essays called On Witness and Despair. We spoke in front of a live audience at Interrobang Books in Dallas. Think is distributed by PRX, the Public Radio Exchange. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram, or anywhere you like to get podcasts, or at our website. That is think.kera.org. Again, I'm Chris Boyd. Thanks for listening. Have a great day.